Follow his pan. Follow his pan. You get an A for effort, Buster Brown.
Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector, the creator of this channel where I rant and rave about board games, usually more the latter. You would have seen me in my previous video talk about Dog Park, where I gave that a respectable rating. Well, now we are looking at two separate expansions in a sense. We're looking at the Dog Park New Tricks expansion, which they recently released at the Games Expo, but we're also going to take a look at, very briefly, some of the mini expansions that they've released, which are kind of like these little packs that add more dogs. You know, we'll talk about that briefly a bit later. But this is a big box expansion, so it introduces a few different modules, some of which you kind of always use together, and some are purely optional, and these are ways to bolster the game of Dog Park that you already had. The main objective of this one, from the designer's own words, is that this one is essentially meant to make it a little bit more appealing for the bigger, like heavier gamers. Not to say that they suddenly make Dog Park into this 3-hour Euro of complexity, no. But for those who thought that Dog Park was originally too light for them, this is supposedly meant to make it more, like, not accessible, but more appealing to them, while giving enough, you know, not too much complexity so that those who are playing Dog Park for a light experience suddenly can't fathom what's going on in here. So the question is, what are these modules and do they work? Does this make this a must-have expansion, or can you just ignore it? So, well, speaking of things we ignore, first up, it makes the player count 1 to 5 players. So now that you have like an extra little couple of board modules to augment the locations and the leaving bonus and stuff like that for a 5th player.
You're a monster!
I don't care about 5th player in games, I don't ask for it, I don't want it in my expansions, and like 99% of the time, most Eurogames do not work with 5 players, alright? I am done with 5 player nonsense. You want to play this with 5? Go right ahead. But I'm just ignoring it for the purposes of review because it's of no importance to me. This game is long enough with 4. I don't want to make it any longer with 5. Okay, so now that we get that little blemish out of the way, let's actually talk about the more meaningful modules here. So you do get a few little extra like objectives and forecast cards just to bolster those. So, you know, a little bit of extra variety here and there. But you know, in no particular order, let's start with the smaller stuff first. So you start with these super location bonuses now. So when you're playing with 3-player games or 4 to 5 player, it's fine. They've got cards for both. But the idea is that these now make the location spots a bit more interesting in the walk. So you flip one of these like you normally would, and yes, it will give you bonuses to add on, like an extra treat here, an extra ball here. But what you now also have in yet another tray, this one is shaped like a dog's toy effectively, or a dog's footprint, not entirely sure what it's meant to be. But you now have these different tiles, which store very nicely in this tray actually, which go onto the location board. They're double-sided, so you've got 8 different varieties here, and they augment the entire action. But these give very powerful effects. I mean, you've got like a couple of here which will let you get extra walking tokens or convert them into VP. You've got one here that can convert resources into victory points. You've got one here that lets you scout, swap, and put a walking collar on. One here you can trade in a trick token for multiple resources or victory points. We'll get onto tricks a bit later. But suffice to say that these completely replace the original space, and they just make the location around that a little bit more interesting. Very easy to implement. I mean, you wouldn't even need to know it was an expansion, frankly. They call it super location, but whatever. But yeah, this is a must include. There's no reason not to throw this in. The abilities on these things are not difficult. They're in the rulebook, so it's just an auto use, basically. Small module, but I think it actually does a good job of making this path just a bit more interesting than it was before. Right, we'll then look at, I believe, next thing I want to look at is the multi-breed. So you now have even more dogs. This is quite a decent amount of dogs here. And these are essentially multi-breeds. Now, for some reason, not all of them are. They've got the rainbow symbol to say it's a multi-breed dog, but some of them aren't multi-breeds. I'm not quite sure what the logistical and thematic reason is for that. For example, I've got like a Scotland Terrier here. I thought it was meant to be Scotland Terrier. Maybe it's just a Scotland Terrier. But I don't know, it doesn't say Scotland, it says Skoland. It's definitely a typo, if not else. But this is just a terrier, which is kind of odd. But most of them are 2 different breeds. So I've got a utility working dog here, I've got a terrier working dog, a gun dog utility, a terrier working, a pastoral utility, a toy working, you know.
dog, pig, dog, pig, dog, pig, pig, dog, loaf of bread, system error.
They've all got the different dual breeds and various combinations. They have a few different abilities to add on to the abilities you already had. But the idea is that you will take about 25 of these dogs and mix them up with the base dogs that you use in the game. And so these will come out to acquire just like anything else. And because they count for everything that relates to breeds, all the dog abilities that want you to get specific breeds, all the breed experts, they become a bit more sought after by players. Not enough to get over that issue where nobody wants to bid more than 3 points for a dog. That still remains the same, but, you know, these do add a nice little bit of extra variety with more abilities, and, you know, the fact that these are multi-breed do make them very useful in multiple regards. Now, these are, there's a minor bad side and a really good side to these. The main good side I love about these is that, one, you got the extra variety, but also they make the breed expert awards a bit more interesting, because now, yes, you only still acquire 8 dogs, but because you now can have multiple breeds, they will count for all the different awards. So my utility gun dog counts for the utility breed expert, but also the gun dog one. So now the battle for trying to win these breed experts becomes a bit more heated and a bit more interesting. And this was one of the bits that I felt was lacking in the base game, and this goes a good way to fixing that problem. Now, the minor bad annoyance is that you only use 25 of these in the game, so you're only using so many of them. You know, how many of them will turn up in the game kind of remains to be seen. But also the setup for this, I swear, one blemish I will say about this game is that the rulebook, it's still not perfect. You know, I said that in the original game, the base rulebook was fine, but it had some blemishes. This one I feel has got a few more blemishes than the base rulebook. There are certain bits in here that really should be mentioned, whether it's in the FAQ at the back or should have been not missed in proofreading, that kind of needed to be put in, particularly with regards to the tricks. But I swear to God, if you understand how to set up the dog deck from the paragraph that's written in here with the multi-breeds, you're doing better than the majority of people who have bought this expansion. There is a Board Game Geek thread about, you know, whether anybody actually is doing it correctly, and I'm not entirely certain anybody's come to a definitive answer on that front. But it should be just a simple thing, but I'm not going to read it verbatim out of here. But yeah, so I like to say, just come up with your own way to set it up by whatever your interpretation is, because I don't think it's going to break the game either way. But again, you know, as much as I love this, you know, new module, I'm not hurting this module for it. This is more about the rulebook being a little bit finicky. It's still kind of like, maybe we would have liked to have used more of these. Like maybe I would just love to shuffle all of these into the main dog deck and then just draw a bunch at random and just say, there's my setup. I don't see why you need to have this weird, like take 25 of these and then cut this deck into 2 halves and then mix it together and stuff. That just gets a little bit weird and fiddly. Why can't we just put them all in? I don't know, but it's not something I want to try, because the other aspect of this that's a bit of a pain is that because you're not necessarily always going to play this with the expansion, or because you need a different set of dogs each game, at the end of the game, you got to separate the gits out. So you've got to put them in at the start by this weird setup rule, and then when the game ends, you've got to then go through the entire dog deck and go, right, hang on, all right, that's that one, those aren't multi-breed, those are multi-breed, those aren't, right, and that takes a while. It adds to the setup and it adds to the takedown time. So blemishes aside, I really do like including these dogs in there. It's just like, could have been a smoother way of doing it.
How hard can it be?
Right, so the main highlight of this game, the whole thing that it's called new tricks. You can teach a dog new tricks, certainly in this one. You have another board that goes above the main board like this. Whoop, yep, stay with me there. And this one obviously adds to the table hog. You know, it's going to need more space there, and obviously people are going to need to be able to read it. But the idea is that you have this deck of trick cards, and it doesn't look like much, but stick with me here. There are 2 different types of tricks, ones that work in your kennel and ones that work when it's out for a walk. And the idea is that you basically shuffle this at random, and there is an even split. You do need some kennel, some lead, but aside from that, you effectively just lay them out. I mean, I think by fluke, that's a legal placement. Maybe it's meant to be 1 extra blue and not red, but whatever. And these will stay on, and these are permanent tricks that your dogs can learn. So the gun dog can learn speed. The hound can learn tracking. You know, the working dog can learn herding. You know, they've all got their own unique trick for the entire breed. And so what happens is each round you now have a new miniature who seems to have gone, funny enough, walkies here. I'll take this 5th player one for now. And this one, when you select which dogs you want to put out for a walk, you also have to select one of your dogs in your kennel for blue tricks or on the lead for red tricks which one is going to learn a trick, and they will just automatically learn it, you know, no questions asked. You have a token that you put on the dog, which is, I like the fact that it's essentially a frisbee. I think that's quite a cool little thematic touch there to make it a frisbee. But you put this on the dog, and it means that that dog now constantly knows the trick for its breed. So my terrier dog now always has the playful trick. Great. Now, these abilities are just basically nice, simple abilities that combo with all your other dog abilities, but there is a cost, which is usually an inflated cost for the turn in which you are training it, and then in subsequent turns, when you're training other dogs, the cost will be slightly reduced because it's been doing that trick a lot over time. But these allow for a lot more shenanigans and a lot more card combo creativity. If you thought that there wasn't enough from the normal deck of dogs that you were using, it sounds weird saying deck of dogs, but these introduce a really cool kind of gamery type mechanic in here, and I love using these. You know, these ones where you sort of go, right, speed. When you use the super location, immediately leave the park. So you remember these ones that I talked about earlier? The game I just played, actually, I was focusing on terriers, and I learned a couple of terriers with this trick. And what it allowed me to do is when I saw a situation where it's like, well, I only need so much out of the park, and that super location is pretty good. As long as I don't need to go, you know, to anything after that, I could take my time nice and slowly at the beginning, and then once everybody starts getting to the point they're about to leave the park, I then jump on the super location and instantly speed to the end and overlap them. You know, pretty handy. But it can also put them on edge if I decide to do that quite early, instantly get to the end, and suddenly it's like, oh, hang on, we better get through this park quick, you know, and then, you know, that's just one, that's one example. But then, for example, here, when you leave the park, you get to do a dog swap and put a collar on the dog. So again, very handy to manipulate your kennel. What else we got? Stay. So after selection, discard a walking collar from your kennel for 2 resources. Okay, cool. So you might, you know, if you're not that fussed about getting these and suffering the odd negative VP here and there, being able to get 2 extra resources of your choice can be pretty useful. And so that's kind of what the deal with this tricks expansion is. This is what the majority of this box is about. Having a way to make the game a little bit more complex, a little bit more in-depth. And again, these are not complex abilities. What makes them a little bit fiddly, though, is the fact that the rulebook doesn't do a very good job of explaining their function. You know, there are a couple of really important things that should have been stated in this book, and they clearly aren't. And a lot of it comes down to a lot of questions that get asked about, so hang on a minute, so if we're training it this round, does that mean it instantly knows the trick whilst it's on the kennel? Do I have to wait till the next turn? But then, you know, that's a weird example. But the idea is that it's just, you know, I can't go into specifics, but the book isn't 100% clear on these. You do generate quite a few FAQ moments from these, and as I said in the previous video,
How hard can it be?
the fact that they're unique every game, so you'll have 7 cards, there's still this deck of cards that is not going used, and just because your, you know, gun dog this round is using speed, it may be that it's on the pastoral dogs later, and you may find that in some cases that means that the abilities can combo in lots of different ways. You know, it would be cool to see more of these tricks in the future, like maybe a mini expansion that just introduces a bunch more of these. But yeah, these are a cool new addition, and certainly one that I want to throw into every game of this when I play it. But that being said, when you throw multi-breed dogs, and particularly these tricks into a game, this game isn't considered, like, you know, as light as it was before. I mean, I'd never considered Dog Park to be a gateway level game. This is definitely going to be one where if you're teaching this to non-gamers and you include this expansion, be warned, it's going to be too much for them. Now, light gamers should be able to manage, but honestly, I think even light gamers might struggle with 1 or 2 aspects. You know, this isn't built, the game is not midweight level quite yet, but it's still got a lot of different comboing abilities. And as I said in the other video, you know, I've seen non-gamers trip up with the rules to Dog Park. I had one game where a non-gamer wanted to learn this with the expansion. They knew I was, well, they wanted to learn the game. I knew I had to play it with the expansion, and I did warn them of this, but they were like, you know, I love dogs, I want to try it, you know, go outside my comfort zone. She definitely enjoyed the game, which is the main part, But yeah, I had to do a little bit of babysitting and a little bit of hand-holding with the way the abilities work because it was just a little bit over our head. And so you gotta be a little bit careful that this is definitely upping the complexity. If you are comfortable with that, then great. But if you really want Dog Park to be as simple as it can be, you might want to think twice.
I don't get it.
Also, rather annoyingly, I would have liked for the expansion to have fit in the base box without any trouble, particularly with the insert. But here you end up with like a cubby hole for your big like new toy tray, then you've got a little bit of extra space for the new pieces, a doll, some of those pointless 5th player things that I'm never going to use, you know, and the problem is with these inserts, you have to keep them in separate boxes. I'm actually tempted to chuck away the insert in the base game of Dog Park because I'm pretty confident that if you do that, you will fit everything into the base box. But you're going to have to chuck away these game tray inserts to do that because you will not be able to fit everything into the base box if you keep the inserts. It's just not going to happen. Now, it's not the thickest box in the world, so keeping this separate is not a big deal, but it's also very difficult to tell what to separate between the two boxes. I mean, do I keep all the dogs in one and not in the other? Do I spread them out? You know, do I just keep the multi-breeds in here? But that means I need to open up 2 boxes. It gets a little bit irritating. I would like to actually just mix it up in the base box soon, although that does mean getting rid of this lovely cover. Maybe I might put it on the wall on my expansion box thing. I think it's deserving of it, but you know, I kind of would have just liked this to have not bothered with game trays. You know, game trays are fine, but I'm noticing more often than not that game trays seem to drop the ball on functionality. You know, they may look good and they may store everything in a nice little cubby hole and that, but when it comes to practicalities, they do seem to be missing the mark a lot of times. And so I don't get excited when I see that logo on a game anymore.
That was pretty brutal even by my standards. No backsies.
Now, before I rate, I just want to talk about the mini expansions very briefly. These are, I don't have the cases for them anymore, but the idea is that you have 3 different expansions. You have famous dogs, you have dogs of the world, and European dogs. Each one breeds, each one brings a new plethora of dogs. So you end up with more dogs to add more variety and mixture of different breeds. But the main thing is that they bring with them 2 or 3 new abilities to add to the roster. And the abilities are very straightforward. I mean, you can kind of understand what they are from the cards, but they do give you some help sheets for the, help cards for the abilities themselves. So just a few examples. I mean, like famous dogs, you can have show off. So when a player places the dog on their lead, they get a victory point. It's not that hard to understand that. But then you've also got hoarder, which basically allows you to, gain, points for various various resources that you shove on the dog. Okay, dogs of the world. It now throws in stuff like, friendly. So when the player places his dog on their lead, they can discard a resource to immediately place the next dog on their lead without paying the resource cost. Pretty powerful ability if you can get that one to work. But then you've also got, Globetrotter that allows you to claim location rewards up to certain spaces away. Again, very useful ability. And in European dogs, you've got Lone Wolf. So if the dog is the only one from its breed category in their kennel during final scoring, you'll get some bonus points. So that's a good way to say, well, I'm not going to get the breed expert, so I'll just have one lone terrier, and that gives me some bonus points. Or well trained, that whenever you do scout or swap, you gain a victory point. And, again, that gives you more reason to start chopping and changing with the different dogs. These aren't groundbreaking abilities, but what it does do is that it really goes a good way to upping the variety of the game. They cost about £7 or £8 each, and as much as I got Dog Park as a review copy and this one as a review copy, I actually bought these with my own money, because one thing I like to do, especially with small publishers, is that if you're very generous enough to give me a review copy to talk about your game, I do like to give some money back to the publisher, and usually what I tend to do is buy accessories or mini expansions. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to review this game, I'm going to review this expansion, I might as well buy these and review them at the same time, and that way they get a bit of money for the trouble. But the main thing of having those expansions, though, is look at the amount of dogs I've got now. Quite a few. I mean, I can't quite get them all out of the game trays with my finger at this point, but I will do my best. Come on, out we go. So, boomf, boomf. And then there's a couple of little bits here. Some get replaced for artwork and stuff, but here we go. That's a lot of dogs. I mean, you've got the multi-breed ones here already, so that's already like another set of dogs that you've got to throw in, but this is how big your deck of dogs gets, and I haven't sleeved this game yet, and I am sort of in 2 minds as to whether I want to do that or not, because there is a lot of dogs, but, the card stock is only so thick, and, the linen finish, I kind of feel like this is a game that deserves to be sleeved. But look at this amount of dogs. I mean, boomf, boomf. There's a decent deck there. I mean, you don't even use anywhere near that amount of dogs in a game. I mean, you might only use about like that much for a game, and even then you won't go through the whole deck. So you have quite a lot of dogs now when you throw in the expansion and those free mini expansions. If you just want more dogs, like more different breeds and more abilities, then these expansions are definitely worth grabbing for that reason alone. So all in all, is Dog Park New Tricks a must-have expansion? That really is going to depend a lot on what you want from this game. Do you want it to be as simple as can be? In which case, I don't recommend this expansion because it does up the complexity, definitely. But if your biggest problem with Dog Park is that there wasn't enough going on in it for you, then this is probably a must-buy because it will definitely solve that problem. Not to say that everything in this expansion works. I don't care about the 5th player thing. That is a waste of money for me. But if you want it, it's there. But it's not going to hamper my, marking of the expansion. But the different, like the little mini things that it gives you, more objectives and forecasts. Those are always good. The super locations, great. They're easy to include. They're an auto include. So it really comes down to the tricks and the multi-breed dogs. I do wish that the setup instructions for the multi-breed dogs were a little bit better, but if you can just come up with some good system or find out the actual true interpretation of what's written in the rulebook is there, then these multi-breed dogs, again, more dogs, we'll add them to this giant pile, we'll add them to this giant pile if you want even more dogs. And so these are definitely fun to include, and I personally think from a gamer perspective that these tricks are a fantastic inclusion. I mean, anything that allows you to do more shenanigans with card abilities is always going to be good in my book, but that being said, the rules could have been a little bit clearer as to how they work. It's not to say that you can't play it from the rulebook, but it's definitely going to require you to do a little bit of interpretation and maybe a little bit of research to get used to them. And somebody's going to have to print out a solid reference aid or like a kind of comprehensive rule set for both the main game and the expansion on Board Game Geek, and then that person's going to get 1 million likes, I think. This really could do with like a 2.0 rulebook proofread, properly proofread to make certain there's no ambiguities here. But those blemishes aside, it's still a solid expansion for me. Not like groundbreaking. I would still play Dog Park if you didn't have this expansion. But I will say that including the tricks and certainly having those little mini expansions really do up the game for me. It would probably bring Dog Park from a 7 to an 8 out of 10 with ease. I think it's now like a great game. It's still not quite there to be a distinction level because of some of the blemishes I've mentioned before and the rulebook issues and stuff. Those little things do hurt it. But from an expansion perspective, I would say that overall, this is still probably 7 or 8. I'm probably going to say an 8 out of 10 expansion because it does up the base game for me for a 7 to an 8. And for someone like me who wants a bit more meat out of this game, no pun intended, for a dog game, this one does the trick. Again, no pun intended. God blimey, I can't say anything without some weird link. But it does what it needs to do for what I need it to do. For you, it may be a different story. It really does depend on whether you want this to be more complex and more thinky, or you want it to be as simple as can be. That's going to be like a big decision maker for you. So I do recommend it personally. And certainly I would definitely recommend grabbing these little mini packs. I mean, they're not that expensive, £7, £8 a time. You get a decent amount of dogs in each. And just by the time you've bought all 3 of these, not only do you have a lot more dogs, but you just have so much variety in this game that it gets kind of ridiculous. And, one thing that this game benefits from is more variety. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. Check out the actual review for Dog Park, where I've gone over how the base game functions on its own. And by all means, check out the other cutesy animal game, Peacemaker's Horrors of War. Yeah, cutesy, that I reviewed recently from Snowdell Design. Let me know your thoughts down below. Do you agree with the negatives and positives I've said about this expansion? Is this an expansion that was a must-buy for you? Did it make it too complex for you? Do you have issues with the rulebook? Do you prefer it without the expansion? Let me know your thoughts down below. And of course, until next time, remember, regardless of whether you believe you can teach a dog new tricks, it's still only a game. So take care, and bye for now.